Can I introduce Fiona Knox, the project manager for Fellfoot Forward? So I'm going to become invisible and silent and hand over to you, Fiona. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Alistair, and lovely to meet you all tonight. Thank you for coming along. What I'd like to do this evening is just give you a light touch through the Fellfoot Forward Landscape Partnership Scheme, and then just draw out a few elements with a little bit more detail, and then link one of those to a potential field visit later on this spring. You might like to come over the hill and down the other side and into the Fellfoot Forward scheme area. I'm going to show you a few slides just to get you into the area, if I can do that, and just give you that first sort of welcome to the Fellfoot Forward area. And this is looking back from the Fellfoot back up to the East Fell side. Okay, and this was a quote when we were doing some of the consultation in the development period. This was a quote that came from somebody saying that Cumbria's best kept secret, Eden is Eden. And I must admit, it was a part of the Eden Valley that I wasn't overly familiar with until I started to come and work there. I was actually born in Cumbria at Kirby Stephen, which is in the Upper Eden. And I thought that was the best place in the world, Upper Eden. And I only ever just sort of cycled through the edge of this part of the Eden Valley on the way up to Carlisle or on and up to Scotland. So it's been an absolute delight for me over the last 18 months, 2 years, actually coming off the sort of main road that runs up through the Fell area and actually diving into some of these small villages and really getting to know a little bit better the area, the wildlife, the people, and some of the stories as well. Oops, I keep pressing the wrong one. Here we go. So there's a map here, and as Alistair said, the North Pennines AONB partnership, they are the lead partner within this scheme, and the AONB itself is the purple line that goes all the way around, and you can see Alston's here. So we do go over so far onto the eastern side, but the green area, that describes the Fellfoot Forward scheme boundary. So from Alston, we can come over Hartside and then down to Melmerby. At that point, we come out of the AONB, but the scheme itself runs over towards the western edge and up following the River Eden, and then at the north just skirts around just below Brampton and then back along the East Fell side on the top. It's one of the largest landscape partnership schemes that are currently running in the country. And it takes in some lovely little villages that sort of run down the sort of central road. So you're starting off at Hallbank Gate, Castle Carrick, Cumru, Croglin, Kirkoswald, Melmerby, and further over on the other side, we've got Cumwhitten and Hayton and some of the other little villages, Little Salkeld. So yeah, beautiful area of the Eden Valley. Oops, I keep doing that, pressing the wrong one. So it is, as we said, it's a landscape partnership scheme, and it is a true partnership. And we're working with all these different partners, plus others as well. This is just a smattering. So we've got some of the obvious ones, such as Carlisle City Council and Eden District Council and Cumbria County Council. But then we've got smaller partners that we're working with, such as the Kirkoswald Environmental Group and Cumbria Woodlands. We're working with the Cumbria Vernacular Buildings Group as well. And then some of the larger charities that you're aware of, such as the RSPB and the Woodland Trust and the Cumbria Wildlife Trust as well. The Farmer Network has also given us a really good inroads into the farming community over in that part of the Eden Valley. We had a vision for the Fellfoot area, and that was that we would connect the Fellfoot communities and strengthen their ties, helping them to work together and realise their shared vision for what we've termed a slow landscape. So we're not in the high peaks of the Lake District. We're not on the Hadrian's Wall Trail where people are sort of motoring along there, or over down in the Yorkshire Dales. We're in quite a landscape where people come and can take time and slow down. So it's not lycra clad, it's walking boots and old tweed jackets, and we're out walking through that landscape and just taking our time to be quite mindful about the place that we're in and to recharge our batteries. And it's a landscape that we hope will become, or is, resilient and rich in wildlife and accessible. And as I said before, encourages that deep engagement with our natural and cultural heritage. What I should make clear is that this programme, this scheme, has been funded to the tune of £3.5 million. And it started right at the beginning of 2020, just as we went into lockdown, and is due to finish in 2024. So it's a 4-year scheme, funded, as I say, to £3.5 million, 2.3 million, I think, of which has come through from the National Lottery Heritage Fund. So anybody who buys a lottery ticket, thank you very much to those lottery players, because that money is helping to hopefully deliver some really good projects down in this part of the river, part of the Eden Valley. We've broken our scheme down into 3 main programmes, and the first one is conserving and restoring. And I'll pick on a few of these and go into more detail, but just a few highlights of what that means, the conserving and restoring projects. We're doing quite a lot of work with the Eden Rivers Trust, all around habitat creation and slowing the flow, because a lot of the tributaries that come down off the East Fell side into the River Eden and then on down into the lower floodplains around some of the villages actually within the scheme area, but on towards Warwick Bridge and Carlisle. All that water coming down off the fell side obviously contributes to the flooding instances that have been when we've had those consistent storms. So what we're trying to do is to hold that water back on the fell side in the land as it comes down onto the Fellfoot, so that we don't get those sort of sudden surges which lead to those flooding instances. Instead, it's held back for longer and trickles through at a slower rate. But at the same time, what we can create for slowing the flow down also helps in terms of habitat creation. We've been doing work with the RSPB at the Geltsdale Reserve, which some of you might have been to, which is sort of over the fell again and then a little bit north from Alston. And on there, we've been doing quite a bit of species recovery work with them. So particularly looking at black grouse, ring ouzel, curlew, and hen harrier. So last year, quite a few volunteers were involved with nest watching because they did have a successful nest. And I can't remember how many, I think there was about 3 chicks successfully fledged from the hen harrier's nest on the Geltsdale Reserve. So that was wonderful. But one initiative that we have been doing for the black grouse is working with the farmer that grazes the fells there and the woodland. And instead of controlling where the cattle move so that they graze and give a nice mosaic landscape, so shorter grassland, longer grassland, grazed heather and open heather, instead of using fences crisscrossing over that landscape, they've been working with electrical collars where they can actually be guided to graze in the appropriate areas and then moved on to others. And I'll pick up on that a little bit more later. We have an environment grant, and quite a few farmers have bought into that environment grant, and we fund them 50% for planting new hedges, restoring old hedgerows, creating new small copse woodlands and scrub, and also putting in scrapes, wetland areas for wading birds and others in that landscape. We've also been working on 2 scheduled ancient monuments and working to remove those from the at-risk register. And again, I'll come on to those later. Our second programme is called Engaging and Training. So the first one was more about quite a lot of capital works. And this is really about working with our Fellfoot communities and those visitors that come in from around the area and further afield. So we've been doing quite a few events with the farmers and their families and helping them to manage through this very turbulent time and time of change as we've left the European Common Market, we've left the Common Agricultural Policy, and we're moving into our new environmental land management schemes. So a period of change, a bit of period of uncertainty, and we've just been trying to support farmers to try and engage with that and get themselves as ready as possible, as fit for elms as they can be. We've been doing lots of opportunities for young people and their families, either formally through schools or on family days and events, and with youth groups as well. We have a programme of community archaeology and local history. And again, we were slowed up somewhat with the lockdown periods, but we've now started our programme. And again, I'll pick up on that later and talk to you about the Village Atlas work and the oral history work that we're undergoing at the moment. And it's also, this scheme is really important in terms of our next generation, our next conservationists and interpreters. So we're a springboard really for trainees coming out of degree courses or coming off farms in the area to come in and work with us for a year, so a year of employment, and then to go on to permanent employment or further study following their time with us. And with the great partnerships that we have, working partnerships, these trainees get a chance not only just to work with the AONB partnership, but to spend time with the RSPB and Eden Rivers Trust, and to take on some of their own small project work and see that through. So we have fingers crossed that we have two with us at the moment, Jack and Lizzie. Lizzie has proved herself really competent, and in fact, our community engagement officer, Sam Tranter, went off on maternity leave at the end of this year. And through interview, Lizzie was actually successful in picking up her maternity leave. So it's been great. We had her as a trainee for 6 months, and now she's a fully fledged AONB partnership employer with us for the next year. And we really hope that this experience is going to give her the springboard into further permanent employment in the area. She's just recently moved into Brampton and is definitely committed to staying in Cumbria and working in the area. So that's all good news stories at the moment. And then our final programme, Revealing and Connecting. So this is about sharing some of these special parts within the Eden Valley and those special stories. So to help people in and through the scheme area, we're reviving and creating some new walking and cycling routes. Some of you might be familiar with the East Cumbria Countryside Project, which I think folded now probably about 10 years ago. They did some fantastic work. They may well have touched into Alston in terms of creating walking routes and interpreting them through the landscape. They've now sort of fallen a little bit into disrepair, and any printed material is out of print. So we'd like to revive some of those because they've made such a good job of creating those routes on the ground, but we're also adding to them. So we've got 4 walks which start from villages, go through villages, and are only sort of 4, maximum 6 miles in length and can be shortened. So again, they're for mixed family age groups and those who are just wanting to take a nice afternoon or morning time in the scheme area. And we've also got 3 routes which we're hoping will be much more accessible for everybody. So one that will take you up into Long Meg and around, one that is around the Talking Tarn, and one at Castle Carrick around the reservoir there. So we're trying to make sure that at least wheelchairs that are relatively sturdy and all-terrain will be able to get around those 3 routes, and families with buggies and things like this. We're doing lots of creative arts and crafts with local community and local artists. And again, I'll come on to that a little bit later, because we've just come out of a phase of 6 pilot projects that we had running through in the autumn. We're doing interpretation and sharing. So the work that we're doing on the monuments, the local history, some of the arts, the trails, we want to actually share those wider. So we're working with interpreters and designers to help those visitors who come into the area learn more about where they are, what they can do, where they can go, and sort of get the most out of the visit if they find themselves there. And because you come up with a scheme like this and it's all a little bit hypothetical in the development stage, and you think this will work, and some people from the community have put in ideas and helped to steer that. But as time passes, there's always going to be other community projects that you haven't thought about or that have just come on board. So we have a community fund. We have £100,000 for the community to spend on projects that they value and that they want to see through and steer through themselves. So we have one category up to £1,000, which is a very quick application for a project which will benefit the people and the landscape and positively impact on the community of the Fellfoot Forward scheme area. And then we've got another category from £1,000 to £10,000 for some of those bigger, longer projects that might have been bubbling for a while. And hopefully we can either cover that cost or at least be a really good seed fund to attract another funding to make that project run. So those are the 3 programs that roughly cover our 3 approaches to this landscape scale scheme. A little bit then more about the nature recovery work that I touched on earlier, just to let you know that these are figures to date, and we're only 2 years into our scheme, so we're only just coming up to halfway. But we've already put in the ground 9,347 metres of new hedgerow. And this is at Canahoff, a new hedgerow that went in, and in that summer time, they're just sort of coming along and giving them a good drink to keep them going, keep them well watered. And that at Canahoff, that was partly to help slow the flow as well. So it's cutting across the field where the water comes down. We've put in 250 new infield trees. So they're going to provide shelter and shade for stock and habitats for insects and bird life, and also add value to that landscape. We've got 10 hectares of new native woodland that have gone in. So that'll be mixed species woodland that'll grow on and again provide windbreaks, habitat creation, and may also be positively managed for coppiced wood at the same time. And we've also, on some of the larger woodland planting schemes that historically had taken place in the area, some of them had become neglected, and trees were bent over, guards were choking trees, things like this. So we've actually gone round and we've helped restore 100 hectares of upland woodland and brought them back into good conditions so that they can continue to grow. So, as I said, this is a landscape scale, so we're doing things on quite a large scale, but all with the support of local community and particularly the farmers and landowners there, because a lot of the planting is voluntarily done by themselves and others. Picking out, because it was in the title, Re-Wiggling Rivers, the Better Becks project, and that's delivered for us by the Eden Rivers Trust. And some of you may have had contact with them before. And their work has really all been about slowing the flow off the fell side and creating new positive habitats for wildlife. So we've been putting in leaky dams. So these are sort of wooden dams that bridge across some of the smaller tributaries and springs that come down off the fell side. And in normal periods of flow, the water just goes underneath and carries on as normal. But if we have a period of prolonged heavy rainfall and the water starts to percolate down off the fell side and into these smaller tributaries, as the water level rises, they hit against these wooden dams, and this sort of woven wooden dam at a higher level just holds back into the land either side, where it re-percolates back down into the ground, and it's just slowing down that pulse of water down the river so that we don't get the high peaks, but it's all just nicely leveled out. So these leaky dams are just made from wood that's found on site usually, or brought in from not very far away, look very natural in the landscape and just give that sort of buffer as we go down. We've had over 5,000 metre squares of new wetland habitat. So that'll be new riverbank, new scrapes, new rewiggling. We've had 4,000 metres of riparian fencing. And this is an example of it down here in the bottom photograph, where you can see the fencing either side of this beck here with a little bit of tree planting. And effectively what we're doing is we're stopping the stock coming down and into the river, breaking down the riverbank, putting sediment and material down into that little stream, which chokes the riverbed, smothers out fish spawning ground, and also insect life. It can clog their fine gills and spiracles and just can knock back the amount of sort of invertebrate life in the river. Plus putting a lot of enriched material in through cow feces and other directly into the water. So we have to make sure that the cattle, the sheep have got access to water in some other way through putting in troughs possibly, but it just protects those delicate riverbanks, and hopefully it's giving habitat back to those special species like water voles who are looking for the riverbanks to burrow into and to make their runs and their burrows, and the tree planting starts to build some shade back over by those streams, and that's good for fish spawning, so it keeps the water cooler, and that helps with the success of the hatcheries. And also the big thing that we've been doing is straightening a lot of rewiggling what historically has been previously straightened. So just coming up to the top right hand side, Town Foot, which is on the Cairn Beck, and this isn't too far away from Cymru. The river comes in the top right hand corner there, and if you follow the tree line, that has been straightened in the past and comes out again on the right hand side. So you've shortened the length of the river, it's deepened the river back, the bank sides, and speeds the water down off the fell side and down into the lower river. So it increases the effect of that peak going down. So what they've done here is, using old maps, they saw that the old parish boundary originally used to take this line here, which is probably a very good indication of where the river used to meander and wriggle its way down the fell side. So Eden Rivers Trust have come back in and they've created a new river channel following very closely the old line of the river and reinstated that beck there. And by re-wiggling it, they've improved that wetland and fen, what they call fen habitat. And this is a picture down below now of how that re-wiggled beck looks like. So we've got nice shingles now on the inside of the bends, and that's really good for insect life, for spiders and others. And that obviously supports good bird life. And then you've got these banks that are being undercut over on this side here, and that'll be giving a nice bank profile for water voles and others. But a local volunteer has had some cameras out, sort of what you call stealth cameras, where you can leave them out and they'll just continue to take film footage while he's away. and then collect those cameras back in and go through and see what's been recorded. And very quickly after that beck was reinstated with its wiggles, we've got footage of otters down there that are obviously coming back in and sniffing around. And as the insect life improves and we get more fish within there, then the otters are coming down to hunt and to feed. And I've got just a little list here. This re-wiggling of rivers, this is one site. We've done another site as well on the Cairnbeck. What those meanders do, as I've said, they slow the flow of water. It connects that river better to its floodplain. So on those high water episodes, the water can flood out and over onto its floodplain. And again, it can accept that water rather than it being channeled quickly down and away downstream. The tree planting that will go on at that site, that will help roughen up the surface and again slow down any sort of water, and also intercept rainfall that's coming as well, and give a better sort of richer biodiversity. And in terms of the biodiversity, this re-wiggle channel will have pools in it and also riffles where the riverbed is rough and it creates mixing of the water with the air and aerates the water and keeps it fresh and healthy. It provides ideal conditions for wading birds such as lapwing, all sorts of really positive benefits for wildlife. So it's been great, a really big undertaking in terms of the construction, but it's already giving lots of benefits for wildlife and aesthetically and for flood prevention as well. I mentioned the cattle without their collars. This is up on the Geltsdale Reserve, and this photograph was taken in their woodland. They've got an area of ancient woodland called Binny Banks, but they've also, over the last sort of 8 to 10 years, planted a huge new woodland over quite a large expanse of the reserve, which is benefiting black grouse and other, obviously, woodland bird species coming back into the Geltsdale Reserve. And the cattle that graze through on the reserve are really important, partly because as they poach the ground, they create little small pockets where tree seedlings and other plant seedlings can get onto that bare ground, that little hoof print that's been scraped out down to the mud, down to the earth. And so you're giving a chance for natural regeneration of woodland species to take place over the reserve. They also graze down the grass in different lengths. So in some areas, we're looking for shorter grazed areas where the chicks from curlew, lapwings and others can actually feed on some of the insects around in there, whereas they find it harder in the longer ranker heather that's around there. But then you need that for some of them for breeding in. So you need this nice mosaic of different habitat types, and cattle can help bring that about through trampling, through poaching the ground and through grazing down the longer rank vegetation. But to try and create that mosaic, you've got to keep moving them to different places to break it up. And traditionally that would have to have been done with fencing. So on this beautiful open landscape with woodland, you'd have been cut up with fences to try and manage the movement of that cattle. So you probably won't be able to see on your screens, but those cattle are all wearing a collar round their necks with a unit just hanging down below. And that unit is connected digitally to an online map that they have back at the RSPB Reserve. And they can draw on their map a boundary as to where they want the cattle to graze within. They'll then move the cattle to that area, set the boundary to live. And now, as the cattle walk towards that boundary, their little units under their necks will first of all start to give them a a humming, a beeping noise, which will warn them that they're getting close to their boundary. And if they ignore that warning and that beeping, as they get closer, they'll get a vibration. And then if they actually try to cross through the boundary, they will get a small electrical shock, which is less than the electrical shock they were getting on traditional electric fences. So you have to train the cattle, obviously. You can't just put it on and say, right, off you go, because they don't understand what's happening. So they have to train them to understand what the noise means, and then what happens if they get closer. I wasn't involved with the training in any way, but my colleague Emma, who does more work on the biodiversity side, she was there with the RSPB on the day, and they were amazed. It took the cattle a couple of hours to figure out what was going on and to get themselves sorted. And the next day they were out on the fell wearing these collars. So really bright, really switched on, and the cattle seemed to be responding well to it. So well, I remember one of the wardens there, Steve Westerberg, was talking to me, and they said they were down at the bottom area of one of the fell sides, and the farmer just moved one of the groups of young heifers, I think it was, into one of the bottom fields. And there was cattle with collars up on the fell side grazing. And they started talking to each other, excited. And he said these young cattle came running down the fell side towards the ones that had just been put in the bottom field. And then they just slammed on their brakes before they got to the invisible barrier and just stopped. So tuned in they were to the sounds that they were receiving that they knew that they need to put the brakes on at that point. And then they just stood bellowing to each other at that point before they got bored and turned around and went back up the fell side. But really effective. And in fact, this last breeding season for the curlews in 2021, they were even starting to draw lines around the individual curlew nests that they'd found on the reserve, so that it kept the cattle out from trampling on some of the curlew nests, because that does happen during the breeding season on occasion. They will lose some of the nests due to trampling, so they were even able to do it to that level of detail. So really excited. It's one of the first sites in the UK to use these cattle collars, and we've had quite a few partner organisations and farmers coming onto Geltsdale to actually spend time with the wardens there and learn how it's working, why it's working, and how it could be applied to other sites as well. So that's been really exciting and a really good first for this part of Eden. We're also helping farmers do some carbon assessments of their farms, because again, this is all getting them ready for the new environmental land management schemes, where it's public money for public goods. And part of the requirement on farms now is to try and hold on to and to actually capture carbon and store it away in healthy soils. So we're just looking at sort of farm carbon assessments. And then again, it's all about sharing knowledge, and we've had training events for farmers on farms across the scheme area who are implementing new grazing regimes, cattle collars, and other such, tree planting, etc. So yeah, lots going on the biodiversity side, the natural heritage. We've also, through our next generation, we've been working a lot with our young people, and we've got a lovely network now of primary schools, 6 to 8 primary schools through the scheme area, who previously were in separate groups according to the Cumbria County Council split into their, I've forgotten what they call them now, like their sort of working groups. But actually, they're now talking to each other because of their commonality within the Eden Valley. And it's nice because the young children from those schools mix as they go up to the secondary schools, so they're getting to know each other a little bit before they go up. So we've been doing lots of work with primary schools through creative writings through the lockdown, from freshwater studies with Eden Rivers Trust. Here we've got Guy Broom with Armathwaite School, and Guy set the moth trap the night before, and the school's coming out and is just going through with them now the moth trap and thinking about the insect life and how that links to the bat life and the bird life. But I think also Guy on that same day did some work with them on the what we call the stealth cameras or the trail cameras, and Armathwaite School's now got its own trail camera, and they're keeping an eye on their wildlife and what's going on in their school grounds when they're not there at night time. We're using the John Muir Award, which is a little bit like the Duke of Edinburgh Award, but particularly focused on the natural environment, to help some of our youth groups come in and discover areas in the Fellfoot area, to then explore those areas, to conserve and share what they've done. And that's worked really well with the youth group from Carlisle, the Carlisle Youth Zone. And one of their groups of older students have been out with us, and they've been stalking tarn, they've been doing work on the rivers, and they've been up onto the fell side as well. We've got a new project that's running alongside us called Place or Green Place, and that's all around about getting youngsters out into the landscape. Youngsters really sort of 14, 16 and upwards rather than the primary school age. And they're going out following trails or creating trails for others to follow, arts in the landscape, and also conservation projects, whether it's through green gardening or tree planting and things like this. And to date, we've been working with up to 1,800 young people. But yeah, really well received and really had a great time with the schools. They're just so game and up for anything. I touched on the community arts work that I mentioned, and it's something, because we're not too far away from you, you might actually be interested in engaging with us on the arts programme. So in the autumn and winter of 2021, we had 6 art projects, and they were delivered by local artists. And in fact, one of the local artists was Lionel Playford, who you might be aware of. He's from Garrigill, and he just came over the hill and down into the community of Renwick and worked with just a few families in Renwick on some landscape artwork. And in fact, the collage cut out here, which is much bigger than that, it's going to be at least 6 foot wide. This was the output from the work that he did with the families in Renwick, working up and down the Raven Beck there, and the youngsters produced with him the big leaves. And then they were looking at the leaves once, and the moisture, the dew that was on those leaves in these little shiny droplets. So within each of these beautiful droplets on the leaves, there's one of their landscape drawings from the time that they spent with him. So that's up in the schoolrooms in Renwick at the moment as part of the exhibition. So yeah, local artists working with local community on heritage arts, really. One of the groups was called the Clifford Movement, and there was 3 women there working with the community at Melmerby, helping them to delve into their own sort of family histories and then celebrate that. And one way they explored those was making these porcelain spoons, which they called memory spoons. And those spoons reflected some aspect of part of their family history. And then the participants wrote a little bit about what each of the spoons meant. They also made some little journals and made some memory boxes as well. So, they were called journey spoons, that was it. And then we had memory boxes. So yeah, we had about 50 people turned up to Melmerby Village Hall, and they had a sort of traditional tea and music, and they talked through the scheme and shared with them Nanny Bainbridge's diary about their sort of family history. And then people carried on with them over the next sort of 2 to 3 months on different workshops and came back and celebrated. We're just about to launch our next programme of community arts. So we're offering out to artists 3 commissions, each of £7,500 each, to work from May through to December this year on a community arts project with a particular community. And we've also got 5 bursary awards for local artists to explore some more of their working practice on their own or with a small group to try and further their development as well. So really exciting. And the arts are so brilliant, feeding across the natural heritage work, the cultural heritage work, and binding those together and bringing people together within communities and also across communities as well. So some really good art. And the picture on the right was a family pebble painting we did at Talking Tarn as we came out of the first lockdown, just to help people get out and back and around. So coming on to our work on monuments, which is part of our programme A, I said I'd touch on in detail a little bit more. And today I've been at Kirkoswald Castle, which again, I keep saying this, it's just over the hill and down the other side, just off the East Fell side. Some of you have probably been to Kirkoswald. There's two lovely pubs there. There's a great village shop, but tucked away just on the edge of the village is Kirkoswald Castle. I'm not a local historian and I can't now remember everything that I've been told. I should have looked it up before I came this evening. But I am aware, I've passed on to Alistair a historic building survey that we had done as part of the development period. So there is a resume there if anybody would like to borrow it from Alistair, or if you want to get in touch with me as well, which will give you a little bit more about the building, how we think it was used, and a little bit about the history. But effectively, this was a hall house, and a fortified hall house, and I can't remember the name of the family whose seat it was. But it came into disrepair because the daughters, if I remember, were married into the Howard family, whose seat was Narworth Castle further north. And so once they were in the Howard family, this no longer became such a site of importance. And in fact, over the years has been heavily robbed. And a lot of the buildings around in Kirkoswald now carry the dressed red sandstone that was in Kirkoswald Castle. The college, the main farm, and the others. And this is all that's remaining now in terms of upstanding, this tower here. And the tower, we think, was what we call the solar tower. So it had the living quarters in there, the bedrooms, and also the garderobe as well. So effectively it's, the bedrooms and the toilet that were left standing. But it's a testimony to the stonemasons who put up this structure, that while the other three towers, because it was a squared off hall house, while they've fallen down and been robbed, this has stood on its own and stood the test of time. But what we're aware of, it's in private ownership, there's no public access to it, but there is a right of way that runs quite close down the side of the field within which it's contained. And it's surrounded, as you can see, by a lot of very mature self-seeded sycamores. And people were coming in anyway, even though there was no public access, and around the building. And this photograph was taken before any work was done. And these upper courses here, which are about 8 to 10 deep on this side, the architect, the conservation architect that was looking at them could see that there was a lot of daylight in between the courses there. There was very little mortar left. We didn't know how secure they were, and also just the liability to the public who were coming in and around. It's a scheduled monument. It's on the at-risk list. It was surveyed about in 2014, I think. And various things were pointed out at that time, but nothing had happened since then. There just hasn't been the money around to be able to do anything. So with Fellfoot Forward coming on stream, this was one opportunity to at least conserve, or I should say consolidate, the last tower so we didn't lose it. So in the development period, we worked with conservation architects, Mosdale Gillets, who've done a lot of heritage buildings. Some of you might know of the watermill at Warwick. They worked on there, and it's now a fully functioning mill again, and they're selling the bread that's made from the flour that's milled in Hexham Farmers Market now. And also Seaton Delaval, most L. Gillett's worked on that with the National Trust, which has won regional national awards for the work. So there was a long period of very detailed drawings and assessments for the tower. A scheme was pulled together and costed up. And then when we were given the go-ahead from the National Lottery Heritage Fund, we were then able to start to work on Kirkoswald Castle. And it was one of our first big capital projects that we ran, and it ran through last year. And we worked with Stone Technical, who were the actual contractors on the ground doing the stonemason work. And this chap here in the blue helmet, this is Brian Ellison. He was the head stonemason who directed the work on the castle. As you can see, the tower here was completely shrouded in scaffolding. And these top layers here were able to be accessed and properly recorded for the first time. So the scaffolding went up, I think it was in sort of like February time, beginning of March. But when they got up there and actually had a good look at the top courses, they realised just how fragile they were. Some of the big stones were literally balanced on a 50 pp size of mortar, and really, Brian said another winter with some frost and those top courses would have been down. So we got there in the nick of time, but we had to pull back off site for a while they worked out how to actually consolidate those top layers safely without endangering the workforce, because as soon as you start doing any movements, there's a likelihood of a fall. So in the meantime, while we're off, the jackdaws thought, this is great. So in they came and they started nesting, going in through the scaffolding. So we had to be very sensitive as we worked, not to disturb them, so that the young chicks would fledge, which they did in sort of April, May time. So this picture here is on a beautiful summer's day or spring day, and the top stonework has now been consolidated. It was pinned through and repointed and made good. And then it's been what we call soft capped. So there's a layer of vegetation, soil and vegetation on there with some succulents on, so that as the water comes in, instead of it going straight down and into the stonework, where it might freeze and drive the joints apart, it'll absorb into the soft grassed soiled area at the top and then re-evaporate as the plants transpire and as the air takes the moisture away, protecting the underlying stone below. We had 2 public tours there, and so for some people it really was a once in a lifetime chance to get to the top of the tower and to look out. And we also did some hands-on lime mortar days with people from the local area who were interested and could take that understanding and apply it back to their own sheds and barns. So instead of using concrete, they were using lime mortar, which is much better for the stonework there because it lets the water pass in and out and breathe. So we've done that work, and I've just come from Kirkoswald today. We've been out there looking again with contractors to think about how we now interpret that site for visitors and what access we can agree with the landowner so that people can come in and go. And it looks like in the first instance for groups, interested groups, it'll just be a case of phoning up beforehand and agreeing access onto the site, and then hopefully having it open for the general public in sort of high days and holidays so that people, you know, when they're out and about and visiting the area, can get in. So that's Kirkoswald Castle. We might be doing some more work on there because we identified a bit of soft sandstone, but we'll see how we go. I'll skip on because I've just seen the time. We're up to nearly 8 o'clock now. And the other big site they've been working on is Long Meg, which I'm sure some of you will have been to. I think it's the 3rd largest stone circle in England and about the 5th largest in Britain, because that's obviously a much bigger area. So a really significant site, very spiritual, in some ways quite gently visited, though the issue that we had at Long Meg was that those people coming in to see the site, there was nowhere to park other than parking on the scheduled monument, which is now causing problems in terms of erosion. So as I said, a really spiritual and dramatic site, but on a bank holiday, everybody's coming in and actually parking on the monument itself and creating these big scars and churning up the ground there. And about 8 years ago, there was a dig at Long Meg to look at a big circular ditch that abuts the circle, and they did a cross section through that and into one of the stone sockets where the stone was now missing. And there's a lot of very fine archaeology in there in terms of stones that have come from the Lake District, from Scotland, from Arran, and somewhere from Yorkshire, which just gives us clues about the trading and the passing of people through that site, through festivals and celebrations, particularly for the winter solstice. So a very spiritual site, a lot of questions and hypotheses about how it was used and how it's changed over time. We hope to try and share some of that with visitors, but in a very sensitive way, because as you walk onto the site, at the moment there is nothing there, so you sort of interpret it in your own way. So any interpretation we put in will be very light touch. But what we want to do is to take all the, gone on too far. We want to take all these cars away and park them 500 metres before you get to the site in a new dedicated Long Meg car park. And then people can take that last 10 minutes, 5 minutes just to walk into the site and be greeted with the stone circle rather than dodging cars in and out. And it's sort of these cars break up your view. So that's what we're doing at Long Meg, and we hope that that work's going to start in March, April this year, and that the new car park will be in place for the summer. In terms of local history, our project Uncovering the Past is working with our community volunteers, and we kicked off in the autumn of last year with a historical walk through Croglin village, and some of our community volunteers who are working on the local history there shared with them information linked to the church and the significant people that were buried there and the phases that the church has gone through. And Bruce Benson down here took people up onto the fell side and linked it to the early mining that there was on the fell side there, and also the sort of trackways and the sacred landscape as you look out from those higher points above some of the Fellfoot villages, and you can start to connect with cairns across the landscape, which could have been sort of little beacons guiding people back in those prehistory days through this landscape. So that was our Croglin walk, and then since then we've done a series of 3 village atlases at Cumwhitten, Hayton and Cymru, and they were all done with community volunteers led by Dig Ventures, which are an archaeology company. Those village atlases are now being slotted into a pro forma and will be available for people to view. They'll go across to the archives, the Cumbria archives, but they're live documents at the moment because we've just moved on to oral histories, and hopefully some of those oral histories will inform those village atlases as well. And what we hope is that the skills and knowledge that people are picking up going through these workshops with us, they'll then take that and maybe in a small group or with a friend can start to apply them to their own villages back at home. So we're hoping some of the other villages, maybe Hallbank Gate, let's have a think, Kirk Oswald, some of those may also be looked at in terms of oral history and village atlases. And in the summer, autumn, we're hoping to come on to actual archaeology fieldwork, and we'll be putting out a programme of that very shortly in the next sort of 6-8 weeks, so that people can engage and book on and come with us to do sort of landscape walks, geophys, and if we get the funding, hopefully some actual excavation work as well around some sort of cairns. yeah, sorry, that was just our little leaflet to herald our Uncovering the Past. And as I said, Cumwhitten, Croglan and Hayton. And as we said, we're just on with the oral history now, Yatters That Matter. And we're looking for people to interview who've got stories from the scheme area, and also volunteers to go through the training on how to take oral histories, make sure you've got the right permissions, translate them, and then get them into a format, some that can go up onto our website with some imagery, and others that will go into the archives as well. So really, I've overrun, I do apologise. I just want to say a big thank you to our Fellfoot communities, and also to you for listening tonight and coming along. Alistair spoke to me about possibility of organising a field trip as the weather gets a bit warmer and the days a bit longer. And I think as we are just literally over Hartside and down into the Fellfoot area, it would be lovely to bring you down to Kirkoswald Castle and to give you a chance to better understand the history of that site, to have a good nose around and to have a look at the work that's being carried out there, and then possibly tea in the village hall afterwards. But it's something that I'll discuss with Alistair, and we'll try and get a date in the diary and agree that with the landowner, and possibly try and get Peter Ryder, who did the historic building analysis, to come along and talk to us there. And then maybe somebody from the local history group that did the work on Kirkoswald Castle, maybe if we go back to the village hall, just to give us a potted history of the life of the families that have moved through that fortified hall house. So that's it. I'm very happy to take any questions that you might have, but you might be ready to head off by that time. I've been rambling on. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Fiona.